panel. Given the recent revelations about the likely involvement of the IRA in the Northern Bank robbery, what are the implications for the peace process?
Right, the implications, Michael D. Higgins, for the peace process of the statement by Hugh Ord last Friday, which all the other parties, the two governments have accepted, and the opposition parties in the Dáil, except for Sinn Féin, and the participants in the peace process in the North.
Well, I think that the Taoiseach statement on Sunday in his interview regarded the developments as very serious. I noted that he, for example, said that he wasn't relying on one source of information, but he was relying on different sources as were available to him, and obviously such sources of information are more available to him than to anybody else. In fairness, I think he did say also later in the interview that it was important to keep the peace process moving and to keep it, as it were, intact. But there's no doubt whatsoever that I think that the process has been damaged and at least delayed substantially. But I think as well, too, maybe the part that was where his irritation showed and where the seriousness of it is showed, and I think where the opposition parties have concentrated, is the breach of credibility and trust. The fact that, as he put it, that those who were representing the political option must have been aware that a project such as this was about or likely to happen. Now, obviously, none of this can be factually demonstrated at the present time, and I'm really, as a political person, responding to, if you like, the Taoiseach statement, and to your question directly to me, and the questioner is that the peace process has been damaged.
But Pat Rabbit has said, for instance, that it underlines Labour's call to the provisionals to end all criminal activities and to spell that out.
I think that this has to stop, this notion that, for example, you could have two versions of your existence, one subterranean, which need not be touched by anything political, and the other where you have, if you like, when I read in the Village magazine this weekend an article by Jerry Adams telling us what a wonderful world could be created if only we were allowed to make it happen, and the waste of money that was being spent on militarism and so forth. Frankly, you have to ring true, and there is no way in which participation in politics in the fullest sense mustn't include an end to all criminal activity and beatings and all sorts of alleged so-called community activities that are involved in what they would describe as discipline and so forth. That simply has to end now. It's another question which you can call as to whether that can be delivered. And if that can't be delivered, that has even more serious implications for the peace process.
Minister, this is a very serious development in the peace process. I mean, it's all based on trust. It looked as if only a photograph divided us between some success, substantial success, and now this.
It's the real case of so close and yet so far, you know, to have so much progress made by the 8th of December last, and then to find that breach of trust coming about last weekend, or at least last week, as announced by Hugh Ord. It is a very serious setback, and Taoiseach said that yesterday. Not a time for hasty decisions. I think we now accept that very little is going to happen before the British general election, but we have to continue to engage. We have to move forward in partnership with the British government, because they are our partners in implementing the whole Good Friday Agreement. But I think the focus will now have to shift. It'll shift on the end of criminality once and for all. It'll shift on the end of all paramilitary activity. It'll shift to ensure that we get that complete and comprehensive agreement, which will mean an end to all of the troubles that are in the north. But we've a long way to go along that road. But we're not going to stop. We are committed to it as we ever were.
Paul O'Brien.
I suppose as a humanitarian worker, I'm absolutely fascinated by the amount of money that has been stolen. It's 26.5 million sterling, which if you work into euros is about 39 million euro. And if we see the generosity of the Irish people and the government in recent times, there's been 20 million given to the aid agencies and 10 million given by the government. So this robbery has generated much more money even that has been given to the Asian disaster. So it's quite a huge amount of money.
Muireann O'Brien, what's your position?
Well, in my view, if Sinn Féin are serious about this process, they would immediately instigate an investigation into the truth or otherwise of the suspicions that have been raised.
But they said they'd done that. I mean,
they said they have gone and
asked.
That is not an investigation. That is just a silliness I just can't believe that they are still seriously talking about entering this process or continuing with this process when on their doorstep they have a suspicion, they have to investigate it. They cannot continue with any credibility without doing such an investigation.
What are the implications for the process itself?
Well, if they don't do an investigation and if they don't come clean out of the investigation, then the process seems to me is just futile. You cannot speak for people that actually, and talk about future law enforcement, and at the same time you're robbing the whole state behind your back.
John Mooney, what's your read?
I think there's a number of different tenets to this, which maybe people are missing the point on. Number one, I don't believe the Provisional Army Council sanctioned this. I think the security forces would readily accept that. None of the current membership of the Army Council, which includes Adams and McGuinness, gave the nod for that particular operation to go ahead. This particular type of activity has been traced back almost 2 to 3 years since the last declaration, or ceasefire declaration. The various elements of the modern IRA have engaged in sort of criminal operations. There was a huge issue surrounding Dublin, and the Provisionals stood down their Dublin Brigade, including their Dublin commander, for involvement in thefts of containers.
Do you
from
think
Dublin
this was
port.
considered by them to be just another bank robbery, and they may have been surprised by the amount
Not
involved?
at all. I don't believe that at all, and my own information and describe this as reliable information is that there's been various units of the IRA operating independently and ad hoc in the Belfast area for a number of different months. There was a 2 million robbery earlier on this year, which the same unit suspected this carried out. The general consensus was that the Army Council ignored this because to discipline the people in charge of it would have been risky to the peace process, because if you discipline them they can cause you trouble. People don't really understand the way the IRA as an organisation works. The IRA is constructed of various people. Some of them wouldn't like Gerry Adams, some of them wouldn't have a great time for Martin McGuinness, people like that. And there was an element, I think, as well of sort of after Ian Paisley's statements on sackcloth and ashes that, well, we'll show you. And there's perception also that crime in the north is different somehow to the south. There's elements of the IRA getting involved in serious crime in the Republic. As soon as it came out, the Army Council stopped that and actually are running the IRA in the Republic with an iron fist. North of the border, things are slightly different. There's certain autonomy given to various units that are being quite given some slack, but I've no doubt whatsoever, and certainly senior...
And what's your suggestion as to the end purpose of the money?
I don't know. I think it's given them a problem. They can't use it.
No, I know that, because so much of it is our northern banknotes to be withdrawn.
True, but the IRA is a poor organisation. It turns over about 10 million a year. Its operating costs are 1.5 million, so you have a surplus there immediately. I think that that money will never see the light of day. I think they'll probably destroy it.
But the question is, what were they going to use it for? I mean, if they've stopped paramilitary activities, they don't need any more Kalashnikovs. They don't need to spend it in Russia. They can no longer spend it in Liberia, so they don't need it for that. What were they going to do with 24 million?
Well, I mean, I don't know, but I mean, the IRA engages in criminality every day of the week to generate money. There are very, very wealthy Republicans living around the border, different parts of Dublin, etc., etc. And, you know, that's the way it's always been. People have the solution about the Provisional IRA, that it was always an organisation that was very much driven towards a single objective of getting the British government out of Northern Ireland and needing the semblance of power out of Northern Ireland. But there was always another side to it, which was about racketeering and money. There are various people who are at the highest echelons of the Provisional IRA that are multimillionaires in the back of organised
Which is why
crimes.
we're insisting on that end to criminality. And I think if Sinn Féin are really serious about the political process, if they're serious about the peace process, now is their time to start promoting the inclusion in the police force, signing up for policing in Northern Ireland. Now is the time that they can show that huge quantities of arms are being decommissioned, going further than the photo that you mentioned. If Sinn Féin are serious about it, let them take those steps.
You're saying the bar is now higher?
The bar is now higher.
Okay,
and they
Vaughan,
have to restore the trust that they have taken.
Yvonne McCarthy, I'll come back to you. Yvonne McCarthy, who asked this question.
Well, as the panel already mentioned, obviously credibility is a huge issue, but without credibility, the peace process isn't really viable. And in particular, the credibility of Sinn Féin is being called into question. I think that they either knew about this robbery or they didn't. And if they did, then that calls their integrity into question. If they didn't, then that calls their authority into question. And whether you can have a party involved in a process such as the peace process in the state is a matter which the politicians and indeed the government needs to decide.
Right. Front row here, yes?
The first thing